Alright, saying it's uploading, so it should work. And time. Okay, so we lost basically 20 minutes. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry about the tech. We'll continue. So the thing that we're going to do today is, because I think the lesson on Bloom Taxonomy and competencies was very super theoretical, which was laying the ground on the idea of Bloom Taxonomy. But then now we're going to look at it in terms of how do you say, like in practical sense. How then do we apply it in the classroom? All right. I mean, we have seen a little bit of it, but it was more more general. When it comes to Bloom Taxonomy, I don't think we've spoken about this last time. Bloom Taxonomy, as we use it either for the objectives or the class activities that we use for assessment, there are certain verbs that we have to avoid because they are very vague, and we need to avoid them because another reason to avoid them is that they do not allow us creating a learning environment where we can measure whether the objective has been an objective has been attained, and also obviously with the class activity that you do in the classroom, it might be hard for you to measure or be attainable within the classroom. All right, and these verbs are the ones that are, let's say, very vague or ambiguous. Ambiguous means that they are vague, they are not clear. All right, and we should avoid them in the setting of the objectives. So here we have got some examples. So words to avoid, things like appreciate, enjoy, realize, master, understand. Like, how do you measure understanding? All right. Learn, know, improve, apply. I think apply doesn't have to be here. Apply, we can use it. Think, believe, experience, comprehend, apprehend, perceive, acknowledge, distinguish. I mean, distinguish is it's a little bit also vague. Evaluate, evolve, accept, elaborate. I mean, elaborate, we can use it, but then we have to attach another phrase of like elaborate by doing something. But elaborate is a little bit vague also to use it as an example. And then produce. Produce can also be vague. And then the ones that we can use are this type, but then we'll look at them as we look at the different levels in more details. And then, for example, understand, you have to say demonstrate understanding, not just understand. All right, and that's what we have. Okay, now let's look at Bloom Taxonomy in more details. We have to keep in mind that Bloom Taxonomy can be applied to any content intended for learners to learn. And this makes Bloom Taxonomy very powerful. So it doesn't matter what subject it is. It doesn't matter what content you are doing in the classroom. Any content, any subject that you are teaching, Bloom Taxonomy can be applied. All right. And then for teachers, Bloom Taxonomy is a practical tool to use, providing framework in which to plan challenging lessons that helps to ensure that ensure learners' progress is maximized. And the fundamental tenet of successful teaching is like the idea of us teaching is really to maximize the learning process, all right, for the learners. Among its many uses, Bloom Taxonomy provides an example foundation for lessons, as it can be used as a framework in which to deliver appropriate activities, assessment, questions, objectives, and outcomes. All right, and you will see this. Like, what do we mean by it provides an excellent foundation? We'll see as we go through the slides. And we have spoken about this in the last class regarding the levels. We have got 6 levels. All right, I hope you remember that. We have got 6 levels. And then we've got remember, which is at the bottom. And what does it require? Recall facts and basic concept. But I think the explanations, we'll look at them in a little bit. And then we've got understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And remember that this is the newer version of the Bloom Taxonomy. This is the revised version of Bloom Taxonomy. Because before we had categories that are assigned as things like knowledge. What else do we have? Knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. But then it has been changed. All right. And when you get into school now, because these types of levels are more applicable for the 21st century context in which we are today. And then the one that we had before, it was, remember that this was created in 1950. This was reflecting what was happening in education during that time. But then things have changed a little bit. That's why we are using the revised version. And then it's worth taking the time, therefore, for all of you. I mean, this applies to me too, that I, as a teacher and educator, we all need to be familiar with the categories of Bloom Taxonomy, their order and what they mean. Okay, and then we'll look at them now shortly, like what are they about. All right, so the first level is remembering, which is the basic, because we saw that it was at the very bottom of the pyramid, right? And requiring the least amount of cognitive rigor. Like they don't use so much of their mind power, their cognitive power, when they're tackling this level. This is about learners recalling key information, for example, the meaning of words. All right, so that's what we have. Meaning of words is really at the lowest level. And then here are some examples of the verbs that are used within this level. But then this is not the only list. We have a number of lists. All right, and these are just a few of them. We've got arrange, define, describe, list, match, name, order, recall, reproduce. Right? Okay, so that's what we have there. And then moving on, because that's very clear. The second level, we have got understanding, and then is to do, okay, understanding has everything to do with learners demonstrating an understanding of facts remembered, all right? Demonstrating that they understand something that they've read, for example. At this level, the learners who recalls the definition of a word, for example, will be able to show understanding of the word by using it in context of different sentences, all right? So that's more clear, right? Like they remember, they can recall the verbs from the first level, but then to show understanding, they need to use it in the sentence. And I think we do a number of activities in our English classes where we ask the learner to use the verb or the word in context. And then here are a number of verbs that are used in the second level, but this is not the only list that we have, as I've mentioned. For the first level, we have classify, understand, explain, identify, report, and summarize. And then we have got the third level, which is applying, and this level is concerned with how learners can take their knowledge and understanding and apply it to different situations. This usually involves learners answering questions and or solving problems. All right. So, for example, after you have a certain controlled context to have them show that they understand what a certain word means, like to show understanding of that certain words. When it comes to applying, you can then ask them to create their own sentences using the verb that you have evaluate them to see that they understood. All right. So create a different, let's say a letter, and then use this number of words within the letter that they are, let's say, creating. And then analyzing is about learners being able to draw connection between ideas, thinking critically to break down information into the sum of its own parts. All right. So here it's really like connecting ideas. For instance, if they read a number of of let's say short text on the same topic, for instance, but then they are written with different information on the same topic. Let's say it's about COVID-19, and then it's like experiences from 3 different people. So obviously their experiences are going to be different. And then now you have them read this text, and then you ask them to connect the information that is, let's say, similar. All right, so the ideas that are similar, then they have to put it together. Okay. And the next one that we have is evaluate. Oh, and sorry, let's go back. And then these are some of the verbs that you can use. We have got analyze, appraise, compare, contrast, distinguish, explore, infer, investigate. And then again, it's like, oh, there's a hand. Yes, Regina.
I have a question
Yes,
about that verb appraise. What really expect?
I'm sorry,
I don't know how to answer that question using that verb appraise.
Okay. I lost you there for a little bit. So you say, okay, for the verb appraise. What is your question, dear? I didn't.
Like
Mhm.
when you are asked to appraise something, what really is expected?
Or it's for you to assess, to evaluate something, to make some sort of judgment regarding that, whatever that you need to appraise.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes. That's what we have there. And then next, yeah, but I think appraise might be better suited here. But anyways, again, it just depends on the type of activity that you give it. I mean, it's the activity that you give to the learners. All right, next we are moving on to the next level. Okay, next we are moving on to the, next we are looking at level 5, which is evaluating. And when we ask learners to evaluate, you ask them to make accurate assessment or judgment about, yeah, I think appraise really works better here. Judgment about different concepts. Then the learners make inferences, find effective solution to problems, justify conclusion while drawing on their knowledge and understanding. And I think we have a number of other examples that we can use in different levels, and then that could also help with us understanding further these levels of Bloom taxonomy or categories of Bloom taxonomy. And here are a number of verbs that I use within this level, and this is not the only list. So argue, assess, critique, defend, evaluate, judge, and justify. And appraise, I think, works best here. And moving on, creating is the 6th level, and which is the ultimate aim of learners' learning journey. At this final level of Bloom taxonomy, learners demonstrate what they have learned by creating something totally new, either tangible or conceptual. All right, tangible is like something, a product that you can see, or conceptually, this is like ideas. All right, ideas that they come up with. And this might include, for example, writing a report or revising a process to improve its result. And then we have got verbs like compose, construct, create, devise, generate, organize, plan, and then I think produce again. We have it here. And then we'll see more examples, okay? And this is just another explanation from the authors of the book that has more details on the revised version of Bloom Taxonomy. And I think you can read it on your own, and it's basically related. I mean, the sense and the meaning that we have here is the one that we have just covered earlier. All right. As Bloom Taxonomy is a hierarchy of progressive processes ranging from simple to complex. Simple as in, remember, being the simplest, and then creating being the complex, in which it is necessary to first master those lower down of the pyramid before being able to master those that are the higher up. And the framework promotes what Bloom Taxonomy term mastery learning. So at first they used to say that okay, before you move to levels like create, evaluate, obviously the learners need to master the levels like remembering, understanding, and applying, for example. But then now we are not really starting from scratch with grade 11 and 12, grade 10, 11, 12, and also grade 9, the ones that we will get to teach. We are not starting from scratch when it comes to teaching, all right, especially teaching English. So which means that you can mix up the levels. You don't have to start with remembering always. It's possible to start with analyzing, for example, but then it depends now on the level and the topic that you are teaching your learners. Right? And then, in other words, by moving up the taxonomy, learners become more knowledgeable, more skilled, and develop an important understanding of the content that they are learning. But it's still true that for them to really create something, first of all, they need to understand, they need to remember the content that they need to use. They need to apply, they need to analyze, they need to evaluate this content for them to be able to create using that content. Thus, by creating lesson plans and tasks, using the examples of verbs, like the ones that we have just seen, the ones that are below the explanation that we have seen provided, teachers can align with different levels of the taxonomy. All right, so that is now to say that now that you know, let's say the objective that you have is under it's under analyze. All right, it's under analyze. Then obviously you need to match and you have to align, all right, the type of activities that you create in the classroom. And when you are creating your activities, if you are creating your activities from scratch, then using the examples of verbs that are provided, it will help you really create, how do I put this? Okay, for example, if you know that the level of the objective is under the category analyze, right? And because we are always provided, there are a number of examples, information or resources that provide us with a number of with examples of sentences and questions that you can use for different activities. And then when you use them, they need to match. So you cannot really ask a question or create an activity that is focusing on remembering, yet using it for an analyzing objective. That won't work. All right, and then you are not doing everything from scratch. Like, resources are provided for us, and thank God for the internet. There's so much information, but then you have to pick your information with a grain of salt. And then, how are we doing on time? Okay. Next, we are looking at next point is by simply moving to the higher level of Bloom taxonomy, these verbs can serve as a basis for learning objective questions and activities that I just mentioned earlier. And then they describe what we want learners to be able to do cognitively with the content about which the learners are learning. So what do we want them to do? That's why when we are writing our objectives, like they go like at the end of the lesson, learners should be able to, or will be able to, all right? And then with the different cognitive levels, then we know what kind of cognitive process do they need to apply within this objective. The higher up the pyramid, of course, there are the more, so the higher up of the pyramid, the more complex are the cognitive processes involved, such as ask learners to engage in a more challenging cognitive work connected to their lesson content. As part of the successful teaching practice, it can be necessary to scale back the challenge in accordance with the response it draws, and moving down to the taxonomy as necessary. So for example, if you give, let's say you start your lesson with an activity that has everything to do with evaluating, right? And remember that evaluating is really higher up in the taxonomy, the pyramid. When you give the learners this activity and you see that they aren't able to complete the task, and you see that it's because the cognitive process that they need to use is more complex, then maybe you have to move down to things like applying and then understanding and maybe even remembering to help them accomplish this activity that has everything to do with evaluating. All right, so you move up and down. You just don't stick with it when you know that the learners are not progressing. And then Bloom taxonomy can be applied in all lesson planning and all subjects. All right, we have spoken about that at the very beginning. But an important point to consider is, however, is that there will be occasions, particularly with first introducing a topic, where it is necessary to spend longer on the lower level of the taxonomy. So yeah, I mean, it just depends on the situation in which you find yourself. When you see that the learners, maybe they are not doing very well with a higher up complex cognitive level, then do you need to go back to dial it down, come back a little bit, and then spend a little bit more time of that? But that will be, you'll be the judge of this decision, that do you need to go down in helping them understand the topic a little bit better before they start applying that information in the context. It's up to you, all right? It's up to you to decide on how the learners are coping within your lesson. So on such occasions, we do not seek to scale multiple levels of taxonomy in a single lesson. Instead choosing to do this over the course of few lessons due to the nature of the content. All right, so here we are just saying, again, that for any level that you are doing in the classroom, it doesn't have to be done within just one single class. It can be done in a multiple of lessons. That's why sometimes you have got this complex objective. So obviously it might be possible that you cannot cover everything within that lesson, all right? So you can do it in a number of lessons. That is acceptable. But don't take way too much time on it that it might affect your presentation and covering all the content that needs to be covered within a certain period of time. Because remember, we are running our lessons based on the scheme of work that we have created, and there are a number of objectives within the syllabus that we have to cover by a certain period of time. Next, okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left. All right, so here's another example that is more tangible, right? When you're talking about Bloom taxonomy, let's say your lesson is about concentrated around a poem, right? So here we've got an example of John Hans's poem, The Lake Isle. And here, so now we are going to look at the different activities that you can do at different levels of the cognitive process. So, for example, after remembering the poem together as a class, learners will be asked to recite the first stanza of the poem, because this is about remembering, right? So you ask them to recite from memory, not reading, right? So that to test their remembering. What do they remember about the poem? And it's reciting the first stanza. And then before being asked where Hans would like to be, London or Lake Isle. So this is now depending on the poem, right? So let's say for remembering, they recite, and then you ask them number of questions, to show understanding of the poem. So where will Hans like to be? Is it London or is it Lake Isle? And then the next activity for the next level, learners could move on by describing the structure of the poem, explaining his use of rhythm and rhyme. Okay, so that is now applying. How did they need to explain how did he use rhythm and rhyme? They need to describe that. And then in the next part of the lesson, learners might be asked to analyze the mood of the poem, exploring how the mood is created. All right. So maybe if the poem has so much excitement, like you can sense some sort of excitement, how has the mood of excitement been created? All right, so here they are really analyzing, like what words did he use, what sentences, structure, and all that kind of wonderful stuff that you'll find in the poem. And then at the level of evaluating, learners could be asked to pick one of the images from the poem and then evaluate its effectiveness. Was it how it's used? Was it really effective? And then they need to provide, like they need to back up their reasoning. Like was the image very effective? If they say yes, they need to give reason why they say it was effective. If they say no, why do they think that the image was not effective? And then in the last part, which is creating, finally an appropriate activity to this finish of the topic might be to get the learners now to write their own poem on a similar theme, for instance. All right, so that's what we have. That's more concrete, right? Regarding Bloom Taxonomy. Do you have questions so far? How are you doing on time? Okay, we've got 15 minutes. Any questions? Oh, what? So the last message from Albertina that say yes, it's showing. I'm like, wait, what are we talking about? But I remember that was from earlier. So does that make sense? What we have just covered, does it make sense? Yes, it does. All right. Thank you, Regina, for the feedback. And do you have questions? Any questions so far? Okay, you need to tell me yes or no. All right, it's all clear. All right, we are moving on. Okay, thank you for the feedback. All right, another point to make clear is that the separate processes of the taxonomy can be adapted according to the age group and the ability of the learners, and then enabling them to access the different levels of taxonomy according to their overall depth of cognition. So let's say for level 6, which is creating, obviously it's not going to be the same for, let's say, 5-year-olds and versus the 16-year-old. So the creating, the activity that you give should reflect the level of understanding of the learners. And so 5-year-old activity definitely is going to be different from a 16-year-old activity when it comes to creating. But then we need to know that the hierarchy, like the categories, will always be the same. All right, just knowing that a 5-year-old creating activity might be simpler than the creating activity for 16, but we do know that for both of them is at the highest level of the pyramid, right? So the levels will always be the same. They will never change. And here we have got more information on the activities and questions that we use. So activities and questions are the fundamental tools for all teachers to use daily. All right, both activities and questions require learners to use different cognitive processes to interact within the learning lesson content. The quality of activities set and questions asked have a direct impact on the progress that the learners make. By aligning this with the Bloom Taxonomy, cognitive demands are made on learners, which can facilitate more challenge and help ensure rapid learning. So what do we have here? And I think this point we have already covered, that for you to ensure that the objective that you have is covered, is attained in some word or mastered, this will depend on the type of activities that you give your learners and the type of questions that you give your learners. And as I've mentioned earlier, that you cannot ask questions that are at the remember level when your focus of the objective or the focus of the lesson objective is on, let's say, evaluating, right? And then for you now to help the learners attain all these objectives at different levels, that will depend highly on the activities and the questions. I've repeated myself there. And then now we're going to look at some examples of question stems and sample activities for each of the Bloom Taxonomy level. All right, we'll see them below. And remember that this is not the only list that we have regarding this number of levels. So the type of activities and the STEM questions that we have, this is not the only list that we have, but it's a good starting point. Anyways, it's a good starting point. Now let's look at, okay, we have got 10 minutes. All right, let's look at, let's say, remember. So you've got remember is the level, so the first level, and here we've got some examples and then some samples. So samples means just examples of activities that you can do, examples of activities that you can do. So here we have got questions like what happened after. So that is a way to ask them. So what happened after? But then they need what happens after John moved to London. So they need to remember the information that they've read. All right. How many? So these are the questions that you have. Who was it that did something? So they need to remember from the text that, from the reading text or the listening text that I have just covered. What can you describe what happened at, who spoke to, can you tell why, find the meaning of what is, which is true or false. All right, so these are the type of questions that you can ask within this level. And then some examples is make a list of the main events, make a timeline of events. All right, make facts chart, write a list of pieces of information, list all. All right, so these are just some of the example of the activities or tasks that you can do within the classroom. And I'm not gonna go through all of them because we have only about 6 minutes left, or less than that actually. We have got 3 minutes. And then the next one we have got understand, and the type of questions you can ask. Can you write in your own words? Like in your own words, always reflect, learners showing their understanding. Can you write a brief outline? What do you think? All right. And then here we've got illustrate what you think the main idea was. Make a cartoon strip showing the sequence of events. All right, so these are just some of the examples, and I will definitely post these notes right after the class so that you get to see them. And then we've got apply examples. Do you know another instance where something that they've read about happened or they've listened about happened? All right, and could this have happened in could this have happened in whatever situation that they are going to apply? Can you group by characteristics such as whatever that they need to characterize? And then here are some example. Construct a model to demonstrate how it will work. Make a scrapbook about the area of study. Take a collection of photographs to demonstrate a particular point. So these are just some of the examples, and the extra ones you can read on your own, because I just want to finish this quickly. Okay. And then we've got evaluate examples. We have got, is there a solution to judge value of? Can you defend your position about whatever topic that they are covering? Do you think something is a good idea, or is it a bad idea, or is it a bad thing? And then example of activities: conduct a debate about an issue of special interest, make a booklet about 5 rules you see as important, convince others. So that's just a few of the examples. And then next, create questions that you can ask. Can you see possible solution to, if you had access to all the resources, how would you deal with a certain problems, for example? And examples of activities: write a TV show, play, puppet show, role play, song, or pantomime about something. Design a record or book, a magazine cover for whatever, school magazine, for instance. So that's what we have there. So those are the examples, and I think we'll just stop here for today because it's 11:25 and I don't want us to go further than that. Do you have questions so far? This far, I'll give you a chance. Any questions? And please talk to me, yeah? No questions. It's very clear. And then we are seeing how Bloom Taxonomy can be applied in the lesson, yes? All right, and I think we're just gonna end here for today. So we've looked at Bloom Taxonomy, the importance and the role it plays within our lessons. And then we have seen the explanation of this Bloom Taxonomy and a list of a number of verbs within each category. And then we have seen the example questions that we can use within different levels or categories, and some examples of activities that we can use. And I think we'll then decide on these activities as we look at the different skills, the reading, the writing, the vocabulary part of the syllabus. All right, that's all for today. Thank you so much for coming, and then we'll talk in the next class tomorrow.